Leah Sylvester, welcome to the Fiduciary You podcast. Thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome.
I'm excited to be here.
I'm glad you're excited. I am super excited. We're going to have, I think, an awesome show, awesome conversation today. You are a partner and the director of retirement plan services at Shepherd Financial. You and I actually originally met, I don't know, maybe a month ago or so on an episode of Retireaholics. You were the featured guest, and robe guy Mark Palmini was out. I think he was at a professional golf tournament he was watching, and so JD asked me to kind of co-host and be on the show. And to be honest, I didn't. I think I'd heard your name, but I didn't really know who you were. And I was so incredibly impressed by you and your thoughts and your comments. Took a little while for the group, to let you get a word in edgewise. But once you did, I just thought you had some incredible insights. And so afterwards, I shot you an email and was like, I have to have you on this show. And you agreed. So thank you.
Yes, I'm so excited to be a part of this conversation. I had so much fun on the Retireaholics episode and getting to know you better that I felt like this could just be a continuation of that conversation.
Well, we are going to have fun today. And I think we're going to be talking about some topics that are really relevant and important within the industry. And just so listeners are aware, I think this is going to be one of the coolest episodes of the Fiduciary You podcast. There's probably not going to be a ton about actual retirement that we're going to talk about. And so you'll hear more as we kind of get into it. But Leah, before we do, why don't you give a little bit of background about who you are, how you got into the retirement industry, and then ultimately how you got to Shepherd and what you do there on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. So I actually grew up outside of Detroit, Michigan, and went to school at the University of Notre Dame, and I studied mathematics. And I had no idea what I was going to do with my life, but somebody once told me that generally speaking, people who are good at math make good actuaries. So coming out of school, I started working on large defined benefit plans as an actuarial analyst, and then realized being an actuary is a lot harder than what they tell you. Okay. So I also wanted to talk a lot more than most actuaries. So I moved into the 401k space as a third-party administrator for two firms for really the first 8 years of my career, and then was asked to be a part of Shepherd Financial back in 2015 as the firm was getting started as a merger of two prior businesses. And I was named the Director of Retirement Plan Services, and I've been there now at Shepherd for 7 years, working with plan sponsors, developing our service model at Shepherd Financial, and really have been able to grow our team from 16 members now all the way to the size of 30, and was made partner of the organization in 2019 and have really never looked back since.
That's awesome. Usually in these conversations with my guests, I'm the dumbest one of the two, but that is like doubly so on this call, the fact that you majored in mathematics and were an actuary. So I will do my very best to try to keep up with you intellectually, but you may need to throttle a little bit because I think your neurons fire a little faster than mine do. What's the difference between working as a TPA and as an advisor, and like how is that whole kind of transition? Like what was easier about it? What was harder?
This might sound a little abrupt, but I feel like the biggest difference is back office versus front office, client facing versus not. As a TPA, at least my experience was very much back office. You learned a lot about the intricacies of a 401k plan and all of the ERISA compliance rules and tests that go behind the scenes, if you will, whereas a financial advisor simply talks about those things high level. In my role at Shepherd, I found as much as investments are an enormous part of what we do, they really are only a part of what we do. And so much really is talking about the things that a third-party administrator knows in and out, and yet they're not out on the streets having those conversations. I think it's but definitely client facing front office compared to that back office feel. And that's ultimately for me why I enjoy this side of the business so much more, is getting to consult on a daily basis, on an every single minute basis, and getting to help people more directly versus behind the scenes.
Yeah, you really get to play the role of more architect and tradesperson, right? From that perspective. And, it's funny, people who are listeners of the show and who know me know that my opinion is that investments are important, but it's like 10 or 15% of the gig. It's become even more commoditized over the years. I would say investment due diligence, investment selection, that's like the easiest part of the job. But being able to translate and this is where I think you have a real advantage, right? Really knowing the nuts and bolts, but being able to kind of bring that to life. And, the best advisors, and you've built a pretty phenomenal practice at Shepherd, it's being able to influence and shape and courageously lead plan sponsors to be able to make the decisions they probably wouldn't make on their own. And the fact that you have that background, so much for as much as we talk about fiduciary liability, and certainly in the large market, like that is real. But I would say that generally speaking, I know throughout my career, smaller plans, 50 million and under, the risk of operational failure is so much higher than the risk of, getting sued by participants. And operational failures, that's expensive, getting those corrected, going through a VCP, like that, and so as advisors can really help plan sponsors on that end. And when you help clients kind of unwind, nobody wants an operational failure, but I mean, they happen all the time. These plans are so complex and they're so system dependent. Have you found that being able to really, I found that it created, when you really help a client work through operational issues, you create a sense of loyalty in a much, much stronger way than, just being able to talk about a fund lineup and investment due diligence. Have you found that as well, kind of, in your experience?
I have. And again, this is not a knock on any of my TPA partners by any means. I just feel like as an advisor, you're actually getting to meet with a plan sponsor in person, generally speaking, or at least over a video call, and having some of these conversations. At Shepherd, we do fiduciary training, and one of our sessions is on plan documents and knowing what your document says and are you doing it in practice. And it's probably the number one session that people, I think, dread sitting through because it is so technical.
Right.
But like you said, it's been the one that has retained business, has won us business, because no one's told them ever that their document said this, and all of a sudden now we have corrections, we have things, and there are just things that you're pointing out, that knowledge base and being able to consult on that's really what plan sponsors need more than what investments do I need in this lineup and whatnot. It's really, how do I run this program and stay out of trouble, and making sure that my I's are dotted, T's are crossed on all those not fun compliance items or document issues. But that's when they care, because that's where the dollar signs come in if failures or corrections are needed.
Yeah, and that is, I always used to say that, like, operational failures, if you're in like HR, that's like a serious career limiting maneuver. When you have I had numerous times throughout my career where I came across plans that, we're talking, 6-figure corrections. And sometimes it's as simple as, the payroll system, there was a glitch and they wound up, somebody didn't get, when they became eligible, they weren't, given the opportunity to join the plan. Or I remember there was I'll leave the payroll company unnamed, but we saw this with a number of our clients, is they had some glitch where if a employee had hit the compensation limit, but hadn't fully been able to contribute, they turn them off. And if you know the ins and outs of the rules and regs, it's not when somebody they take their total comp in for the plan year. It's not like if somebody hits the comp in June, that's not when you should turn them off. And that was it was something that nobody, like, we found it, kind of uncovered it, and then actually went to number of other clients that were with the same payroll provider and said, we need to check this. And sure enough, like it was some system glitch that had happened. But I can tell you, like, those aren't fun conversations, but they are fun in the sense of when you can solve that problem for a client, you just build this massive loyalty. And like you said, most clients, like, they just want to know, like, do I have an issue? If so, what do I do? And let me get it fixed. And, let me do whatever I can to make sure this doesn't kind of happen again. I bet your insights and just knowing the nuts and bolts, definitely more than most advisors. You don't just talk about it. Like, you understand it from the ground up. I bet that's been a big benefit to you in your practice over the years.
I'm not a very good BSer, so I have to know what I'm talking about.
I've learned that about you.
I'm not very good at that. I think people can read right through me when I am just placating around some sports team that I don't actually follow or whatnot. So I don't do that very often. So it's been helpful for me in my career, since I lack that skill to actually be able to know something to back up those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things, and so here's where, for listeners, the thrust of this conversation is going to go. And, one of the cool things about these conversations is we do a little bit of prep time before we hit the record button. And Leah and I had actually a really, really good conversation. In fact, when we connected a few weeks back to even talk about doing this, we talked a lot about the need for more mentorship and sponsorship in the industry, especially for women. And so that's going to be a big thrust of this conversation today. And I think Leah's going to have some pretty incredible insights about this. But Leah, why don't you start by just talking about kind of your experience and why you were so passionate about giving more women within the industry and even within your own firm, not just a voice, but a seat at the table.
When I was a TPA, I was surrounded by women in our office. We were heavily female dominated, and yet there really wasn't a lot of leadership within our organization. We had a manager who was female, but ultimately there wasn't a lot of leading. It was a lot of, here are the rules and we need to make sure we all follow them. And for the most part, we were a very solid team from that perspective. But there wasn't a whole lot of development in terms of how to accelerate your career, how to look for other career opportunities, how to build on just general skill sets. It was, here's the job, meet these deadlines, do it well, and we'll give you, a little bit of money along the way for it. When I went to Shepherd, and moving into the financial consulting on the investment side of things, it was a completely different world. I was the only girl, it felt like, in most of the rooms. I was constantly playing catch up in terms of learning the investment consulting side of this business. And I was having conversations with so many people, particularly men, and I don't think I was ever getting eye contact. I was being overlooked, and it was something that I realized very quickly. I can sit quietly behind the scenes and hope to be noticed, or I can try to do something about it. And so I fought very hard to become, all I wanted to do was become a partner at Shepherd Financial. And it cost me so many hours of work, so many weekends gone, just doing everything I possibly could to grab somebody's attention. I just thought if I could be the absolute best, bring in the most business, service our clients, add additional services to our model, make us a presence, that somehow I get this breakthrough. But ultimately, the reason I broke through is because of both sponsors and mentors of mine that really helped me along the way, because I feel like no matter how good you are, it is true. It is all about who you know. You have to know something, but it's so much more important to know people who can help you get there. And which is why I do feel pretty passionate now as somebody who has reached a lot of my own goals, still reaching for others, but it is definitely something that I know I could not have gotten there on my own. And how can I return those favors or help others reach their goals along the way? And especially as a woman, we are told to follow the rules and to make sure that we're staying in line, and we don't really feel all the time we're encouraged to think outside of the box or to stretch beyond what the task at hand might be. I think oftentimes it's because women are overloaded with so many other things going on, but taking that time for yourself and really promoting yourself and figuring out what can I do to further my value and my goals is, generally speaking, so far down the totem pole. That's why we're not very good at it.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting, and you and I talked ahead of time, and there, and I think this is changing in the industry, but too often we get caught up in these kind of negative sum games, right? If there's 8 slices in a pizza, if I take one slice or if you take one slice, that's one less slice for me, right? This kind of negative sum. And I'll relate just a quick little story I had mentioned to you before we started recording was, 20 years ago when I started at Morgan Stanley, my very first week, I was in the men's room, and the most senior advisor broker in the office walks in, and he saddles up next to the urinal right beside me, which if you're a dude, like that's a no-no. Like that is just bad bathroom etiquette. And he's like, "What's your name?" And I told him, and he didn't call me by my name. He called me Rookie. He goes, "Rookie, if you want to be successful in this business, this is what you got to remember. What's mine is mine, and what's yours should be mine." And I'm sitting there and I'm like, number one, this is the most awkward conversation I've ever had. And number two, it's the worst advice that I've ever gotten. I feel like, I think that's the way the industry used to be. I think in some corners it still is, but we need to, all of us, recognize that this business is a positive sum game. Just because, I get a client doesn't mean you can get a client. Just because I have some measure of success doesn't mean you can't have some measure of success. And, in some ways we need to, and that's, I think, that evolution from, being just a player to a coach is, how do we look for people and how do we begin to lift them up? How do we give them opportunity? How do we give them voice? And, you and I talked a little bit about mentorship, but there's, and I want to talk about that and kind of your philosophy on mentorship. Mentorship is really bringing somebody, alongside and kind of teaching them the ropes, investing in them to kind of teach them how to do this. The other thing, though, I think is sponsorship. You need someone to advocate for you. A mentor can typically be either internal or external. And I've been blessed to have an incredible group of mentors over my life. And we'll talk probably a little bit about this. And I think maybe you've had a similar experience, but they didn't really find me. I had to kind of track them down and in many cases sell them on why they should mentor me. It wasn't like they were kind of looking for looking for me, but sponsorship is more internal. That is someone to advocate for you, not necessarily teach you the ropes, but to help make space for you and give you a voice and give you an opportunity and bring you, kind of shepherd you, if you will, to the table. So that you can, so that you can really fulfill your potential. So talk a little bit about just your experience with mentorship, both in terms of being mentored, and maybe you've got some experiences you could talk about that, but then how you've kind of now pivoted to being intentional about mentoring others.
So I agree with you on mentorship in that it doesn't have to be somebody who is in this industry. I think mentorship is really just helping somebody. It's a sounding board in a lot of ways about issues that you might be going through, decisions you're trying to make. And oftentimes you really just need an outside party to help you determine the best course of action, or lay out those pros and cons and talk those through with you. I also think it's just generally someone with a little bit more life experience in oftentimes. So whether that's specific to financial services, and I think there's great mentors to have within your industry as well as outside. But I agree. I think that's more just general guidance along the way that helps you make those types of decisions. And for me, that's always been actually outside of my of financial services. I never really had a great mentor in financial services. And I think some of that comes with the fact that I didn't really have anybody that I could talk to. I felt like I was boxed in, and by even talking about things that I was concerned about meant that I was admitting a weakness. And I think that's been hard for me it had been hard for me in this industry, is just feeling like if you had a concern or a question, especially as a female trying to get ahead, you couldn't admit that. You couldn't talk about that to somebody that close.
So being vulnerable was a hard thing to do.
Very vulnerable was very hard. Being vulnerable at all, you just didn't want to show first of all, any emotion, any sort of confusion, or not being fully sure on something. I remember when I started at Shepherd, somebody threw down a couple of fee disclosures in front of me and told me to figure out the costs of the plan. And as a TPA, I'll just tell you, the only costs you knew were maybe your own fee schedule. No one talked about an expense ratio of a mutual fund, or asset charges and how plans are paid, revenue sharing, reimbursements. And yet I couldn't simply say, I have no idea what you're talking about. I had to just quickly scramble and try to figure this out on my own. Thank goodness for Google and having a math brain. But honestly, I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I have no idea. And yet being too afraid to admit that. So all of my mentors have really come from outside, and one of them being a family friend, a female who was a partner at a law firm. And I just would talk to her about things along the way. Just what did you deal in this type of situation where you didn't know what the heck you're talking about, and yet you had to figure it out. So
do you think that, so just out of curiosity, do you think that was more of your own kind of head trash, that I can't be vulnerable, or I can't, do you feel like that was more of a culture thing within the company where that was looked down upon? Or do you think that was more of you internalizing and thinking that was the case and then kind of operating as such? I know myself in business and personally at times, like there's a lot of head trash that can go on where it's more my perception than it is reality.
Most certainly the latter, my perception versus the reality in this particular case. I just felt like my own worst enemy in this particular case, and just not just simply asking for help or saying, I don't know this. That was a totally acceptable answer looking back.
Right.
But in my mind, I could not admit that. I did not want to admit that. I wanted to save that type of vulnerability or mistake for something else that would ultimately, I'm sure, has shown its head. But no, I definitely, whenever I can, I would not want to admit fault from that perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny now that like the position you're in, like I'm sure if somebody came to you, number one, like if they didn't know, like you want them to say that because that's a teaching opportunity. Number two, like if somebody doesn't know, you want to make sure you show them, because otherwise they're creating risk, right?
Right.
But a lot of times, and this is probably a learning lesson for firms that are out there, is a lot of times we leave things unsaid. And I think it's when it's kind of maybe a lack of communication that creates those spaces for where kind of people can misperceive things. And I think that's probably a learning lesson for, those of you who are listening that either are running firms or running practices or have people that kind of report to you, is don't assume that they know that it's okay for them to admit either mistakes or that they don't know. Get that out on the table and communicate that's how you learn. That's okay that you want them coming to you. I think that's probably a good learning lesson. Don't just assume that people know that, because they may not. They may misperceive that.
Mm-hmm. I have to laugh about the retireaholics and the using an acronym, right? I mean, and there's a penalty. Well, I remember the
Painful
first
penalty, man. That's it. You got to drink hard liquor, man. That
super painful.
super painful.
But I remember the first time somebody sat me down and said, "You guys keep talking about ERISA. I have no idea what that is."
Right.
And at my firm, and someone who really shouldn't really know what that is. It was a very genuine question, and I was so proud of that person for even asking that. I mean, to even talk about an acronym, the acronyms we throw around so loosely, right? And what does that actually mean for someone to have the courage? Because the way we always talk about things, it's like it almost feels dumb. Like it does to ask. I don't know what that means. I don't know what 408B2 is, or I don't know whatever it might be.
Basis point
yeah.
is my favorite.
Yeah.
That's yeah. And so that's just an interesting, because that relates probably to clients as well, right? We're kind of this echo chamber in the industry. And so we talk about, and we use these acronyms because we know it. And a lot of times it's hard to have the awareness that we're probably using those same acronyms when we're talking to clients who aren't in the know, let's say, or prospects who aren't in the know. And very few people are going to have the self-awareness or the confidence to raise their hand and say, I don't really know what that means. Like, what are you talking about, right? What are they going to do? They're just going to remain quiet. They're going to kind of shut down or whatnot. And one of my kind of core philosophies is that our job in the advisory industry is to, make the complex simple. And just because something's simple doesn't mean it's simplistic or it's not sophisticated. A lot of times people confuse simplicity with lack of sophistication, but the real art to being an advisor is to be able to take all of that complexity under the hood and then be able to package it, if you will, in a way and communicate it in a way that makes things really simple. And I've said this on podcasts before. Woody Guthrie said that any fool can make simple things complex, but true genius is being able to take the complex and make it simple. So, again, another kind of lesson takeaway. And we're all guilty. We're all guilty of it.
Completely. And I know we kind of took a turn here, but I think for me, that was something that I wish I had more of, going back to your original question about having a mentor, which is someone to tell me it's okay to not know the answer. It's okay to admit that you don't fully understand this concept. It's okay to not be, perfect. Yeah. And I still have to tell myself that sometimes, and oftentimes, to just be willing to be vulnerable in that way, and people will respect you more for that as well, to just being open to saying, hey, I this is something I don't understand. Or for some, when you're helping someone who's on the opposite end of that conversation, right, you're that much more likely to have that empathy for that person, to be able to help them teaching a concept, or to encouraging them for opening up, and not pretending like they know when they don't, right? So I do wish, from a mentorship perspective, that I had more of that, which is part of the reason I do feel strongly about helping others, so that they don't have, so they can hopefully learn from some of my mistakes.
Yeah. And so how are you intentional about creating that vulnerability in your position as a leader within the firm now, and a partner and running this practice group? Like, what are some of the specific things that you do to try to encourage and foster that type of vulnerability, now that you've kind of been on the opposite end? And we talked a little bit about women in particular, and this is probably a broad generalization, and that's not kind of my intent, but that women generally are going to be more rule followers, and that there are good things to that, but there are also some limiting things to that as well. Like, what are some of the leadership lessons you've learned, like you try to deploy now to create more openness and dialogue and vulnerability with the people that you serve within the firm now?
So I will answer that, but I think it's funny, as you were saying that about women being rule followers. I think that is so true, to the point where we're so busy following the rules, I think we forget to have dreams. I think we forget to do something beyond the tasks at hand. And I think, honestly, it's something that's held women back, and we don't even necessarily realize it. We're just so trying to be really good at what we have in front of us versus thinking about what could be the next thing that's actually in front of us. What do we really want to be doing with our time, effort, and energies? And so, what have I been doing to help women with being a better mentor, with helping them get to where they want to go? First, it's just thinking about where that is. So, I generally have the best time, and really, obviously, the best success, if you will, is having that one-on-one conversation and meeting with somebody on a somewhat regular basis. I say somewhat because life, it gets so busy that, again, as women, we forget to take the time to invest in ourselves. And I think taking an hour to have a conversation fully about us feels super selfish. We just don't do that. That's a enormous amount of time, it feels like, for the week or the day to selfishly want to talk about me, what I want, and where I want to be. That's like almost unheard of. But I really am trying to be intentional about putting that time on calendars and making it happen, and going off site somewhere where people can relax and feel comfortable. If that's coffee, if that's a cocktail, if that's a meal, if that's just a walk in the park, whatever it might be, to really try to unwind and separate from the grind of the day to day, so that this can be a conversation about that individual. And I think it starts with, again, what do you really want? Where are you trying to go? Are you happy where you are? If you're not happy where you are, where you want to be, then how can we work together to try to get there? How can we get there together? And I think it is, as you mentioned, vulnerability. It's talking to somebody and making sure that you're willing to be open about your own failures, your own successes, things that you've learned along the way that might not always be that glamorous or that flattering, but people respect people who are willing to be honest, because we are all so imperfect in so many ways. I don't have enough time to talk about all the things that I've done wrong in my life, but I think by showcasing that there are ways to learn from those mistakes and sharing what you've learned along the way really helps people to build up a trust. And then from there, being more willing to have those conversations and having some of the tough conversations you need to in order to get through, to get where you want to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that word trust is so important, because you can't have vulnerability before you have trust. And there's a great book by Patrick Lencioni, he's written like the 5 dysfunctions of a team and 5 temptations of a CFO. I think the 5 dysfunctions of a team, he's wrote an awesome book on culture called The Advantage. I'm a big Patrick Lencioni fan. But I think it was in the 5 dysfunctions of the team. One of those dysfunctions was lack of trust. And he actually specifically talks about the need for having trust before you have vulnerability. If people don't believe they can trust you, they're not going to be vulnerable with you, because they're going to feel like you're going to use that vulnerability against them. I love the fact of getting offsite. I think that's a genius insight, because sometimes the 4 walls of the office can be, a bit limiting. You can feel like you've got to be on your best behavior. I'm in the office. What are people going to think? And just the ability to move that offsite probably starts to break down those walls where people feel like, okay, it's one of those signals that I think you send probably to your people when you get them off site. That's another probably lesson. Think about, if you've got, when you're meeting with your team members, think about meeting outside the office. Is that going to help promote a healthy level of trust and vulnerability where people can be more honest about, what their hopes and dreams are, what their struggles are? I think that's really, really smart. The idea of sponsorship, and we had kind of talked, and I know this is something that, because there is a difference, in my opinion, between mentorship and sponsorship. I think there's some overlap, but mentorship a lot of times is more of like, this is kind of how you do it. Whereas I think sponsorship is more of inviting people in and giving them kind of a seat at the table. And I know that's something you're really passionate about now at Shepherd. Were you the first female partner at Shepherd? Is that correct?
That is.
And I know one of the things that's kind of on your heart is now, how do you help more women as a sponsor, if you will, get up to that level? Why are you so passionate about that?
I think that most people who know me at a surface level, which is a lot of people, right? There are only really few people in this world that we have beyond surface level type relationships. But I think most people would say I'm a very nice person, pleasant, sweet, just very whatever Taylor Swift like, if you will. And I would say for the most part, that's true. And yet I know that I have a lot deeper levels than that, and some of which I'm not very proud of. I spent
This is where the
so many,
conversation is about to get real for listeners. I'm just going to tell you,
yeah,
get a little vulnerable here. So,
I spent so many of my years trying to get ahead at really any cost. And I have lied my way through so many things to better promote myself. Again, not wanting to ever admit mistakes, but blatantly lying about things that I knew, or maybe things that I didn't do, or people that I actually knew and had never met. I became a very I was obsessed with getting ahead and making my name and doing whatever it took. And part of that along the way was making sure that nobody else ever came near me, particularly any other women. I would do just enough to manipulate somebody to make them think that, they were very important, very needed, but really it was only so that they could help me get to where I am. It was a single sum game, just with me being the only winner. And as soon as I got there, that was all I really wanted. And it was really very empty. It was completely unfulfilling. And then something called COVID-19 came around, and my whole life was turned upside down. Just like many other people, but both professionally and personally, all of a sudden everything changed, and I went through an enormous life crisis. And through a lot of deep soul searching and a lot of therapy, came to realize that that's really not who I am as a person. I got very lost along the way, and so I am very passionate about hopefully making amends and undoing some of the things that in my past I had done to other people. And it's very important for me now to have other women not just having a voice, but I want them to be at the table. We have so many important things to say, and I was one of the lucky ones who did have a sponsor. And Jania Stout was one who brought my name up in several conversations after taking the time to hear me speak one time at a plant sponsor conference. I couldn't believe she even showed up. But then from there, she sung my praises to all the right people to make sure all the right doors were open for me. And here I am today on a podcast with you, Josh. But my whole world changed. I was asked to be a part of so many other leadership positions, and women wanted to talk to me. Women wanted to be me, and I had no idea what had happened. And looking back, it was all because of one very important woman helping another. And again, realizing that the way to get there is not by bringing down others or holding them back. It's by lifting others up. And I know that is like an over cliched phrase, but it is so true. And it's something that I am passionate about now, because I know other women out there who are like me the way I was before. And it doesn't have to be that way. There is so much room in this world for all of us. And I really want to help everyone find their unique voice with what they want to do.
That is so powerfully. And we talked about ahead of time. And one of the things I had brought up to you, and I really appreciate you being, being vulnerable. I think that's one of the things in getting to know you a little bit that I think is so impressive about you. On the Retire Holic show, I had asked you a question around like what your kind of, you felt like your greatest failure in business was, something like that. And you were very honest about that. And then, I've had a ton of failures of leadership in business, and leaving Greenspring was a really hard thing for me because I had to come face to face with where I fell short. And there were some things that I look back and, some lies I told myself and some misperceptions, that I had. And I remember I kind of shared something, and then the chat bar, if anybody watched, people who watch Retireaholics knows what happens, but like the chat bar started blowing up with people just getting vulnerable. That's the power of self-awareness and vulnerability. If somebody models that, it in a sense communicates in a really powerful way that there's permission for other people to do that. And I know, and I appreciate your vulnerability. I know one of the things we talked about ahead of time, and I kind of brought up is, look, there are clearly stories and realities of men holding women back in the workplace. But one of the things I kind of had asked you that I have experienced or seen, not experienced, but seen, is that in some ways women can be as limiting to other women. And maybe more so in some cases, I think, because there's such a fight to get ahead and to kind of arrive. And then once you do, there's this feeling like I got to hold on to this at all costs. And any, other, instead of this kind of positive sum game, any other woman, they might take my spot. And I need to basically do whatever I can to hold on because I've worked so hard to get here. And, that's probably not a popular take, but I've actually had some women that I worked with in the past who kind of reached out to me to say that they had kind of experienced that challenge by other women. In some ways should be the biggest advocates for one another, but in some cases make it so hard. And I really appreciate your vulnerability in that. I think that's one of the most impressive things about you. What were some of the things? So often I think self-awareness is a superpower. A lot of times we don't. Did you recognize? That's a question. Did you recognize, what was it through COVID that kind of opened your eyes up to where you? Like, did you realize those things about you as they were occurring, or was it through COVID something in particular that happened where it kind of like the scales fell off your eyes and you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that I was kind of operating in that capacity. Does that make sense?
It does. I think I knew it in the moment pre-COVID when I was being a bad person, when I was making choices, selfish choices, narcissistic choices that it hits your brain in a certain way, and yet you push through. You push through because you didn't really care. You knew it, but at the same time, you kind of just pushed that little devil down, and you just kept going. You just, or I guess the other, your angel down, I suppose in this case, you just kept doing it. You almost, it was always too late. The words were already out of your mouth. The action was already taken. And then you kind of realized, oh, that was kind of a terrible thing that you're doing. So I realized
the die was already cast, basically. So
it was. And you were already so far deep, so far gone. It felt like the only thing to do was to keep going in order to survive.
Yeah.
And then when COVID hit, there was nothing and no one there. What was it all for? What was it all for? Completely frivolous, really. In the end, it really didn't amount to anything, because ultimately there was, it's the relationships that matter. And when you're not very good at relationships, and you're not treating the people ultimately can see through that. And I think that was my awakening, is just truly feeling alone and having time to self-reflect on some of those choices that I had made in life, and realizing that that's not who I really was, not who I wanted to be, and taking some pretty serious steps in not doing that. I had become somebody who I chronically was telling lies, and I didn't really even know why. Like, I just had to say, if somebody said they had, they managed 40 plans. Well, I had to manage 45. And that's a terrible example because that's not even one, but it's the only thing I can think of right now off the top of my head. But I had to one up them. I had to pretend like it was somebody went on a vacation somewhere and had said, have you ever been there? No, I never been to Switzerland, but it sounded good if I had, and retold somebody else's tale about Switzerland and how great it was and all these things. I had become this person that just did whatever it was needed to get ahead. And um, again, for what reasons, to what end? I don't really know. It's hard for me to recognize that anymore. Um, but I think through all of that and through COVID and having time to self-reflect and really going through this, it's one of those things where, we talk about work-life balance. This is going down a different tangent, but for the first time in my life, I actually have work-life balance where I start and end the day very religiously about when I start and when I stop. I'm very precious with my time because I'm realizing that's the only asset that I have, limited resources on. And it's incredible when you actually take control of your own life, the fruits that can come of that. And, you talk about men and women, and I think men are doing a much better job about, I'm going to do what I want when I want it. And women, we feel that we are serving something else or that we cannot miss out if we set a limitation.
Mm.
And the minute I got over that fear and actually made some boundaries in my life, it has changed completely who I am and the amount of happiness that is in my everyday. And if I could share or encourage 1 ounce of that with others, men or women, I want to help do that. I think what you said about women holding other women back is most certainly true in certain times. I don't think all women are that way, but I think some women can certainly be that way. I think men can be that way.
Yeah.
I also think men and women can help lift each other up, and I've seen it happen left and right. There are certain men in my organization that, or not even at my organization today, but just throughout my life, who I know have held me back, and others who I know have helped me shine and rise. So I think it is a little bit less. I think there can be stereotyped by gender very much,
Yep.
but ultimately it's individuals, and it's surrounding yourself with the right people, men, women, it doesn't matter, but don't be bogged down by those people, my former self, who are holding you back. You know that, and yet I feel like as women we let it happen more often maybe than men. We're just too afraid to step outside of that line, that box that we're told to follow, and follow those rules, that we don't have the right courage when we know something's not right to step out sooner than we do.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love what you said there. I mean, I don't think this is an either or, right? It's not like a binary. It's more of a both and end. And I think that I think women and men, like everybody needs, they need somebody, and we talked about this ahead of time, to believe in them and to cast vision in them, and that is where you start to achieve levels of, we talk all the time about leadership. Leadership is it's not a position on the org chart. You can have somebody who's in a position of leadership who is not a leader whatsoever. You can have people that maybe aren't, my philosophy on org charts is really, I call it invert the org chart. Like so often, right, we have like the partners, the leaders, the owners at the top of the org chart, and then everybody else below. Well, as leaders, men and women, we need to think more about inverting that, right? Where you have the leadership at the bottom and they are there to support the people that they serve. And it's not just it's powerful visually, but what that communicates, and in our business, there's a couple of things that you said. It's funny, whether you're a man or a woman, like this is an ego dominated business. It just bottom line. And when you let your ego get out of control, and I am guilty. I did a lot of deep work after leaving Greenspring as well. And I have so many wonderful memories. But I had to come face to face with some real failures of leadership on my own, sometimes where just, my ego got out of control and getting to a point of recognizing, we're in this business that's fiduciary focused. I mean, the essence of what it means to be a fiduciary is to put somebody else's interest before your own. That's not just for clients. That's the people that we work with as well. And and maybe this is more common with women who are just kind of hoping, sometimes maybe, and these are generalities, but maybe there's a view that men kind of make their way, make their voice, raise their hand, kind of push forward and bully their way into to a seat at the table. And, perhaps women at times, are desiring and hoping, kind of like Janya did with you, that somebody would see you and elevate you. And I think there's a couple of lessons there. If you're in a position of leadership and you're listening to this podcast, I think you need to lift your eyes up and start to look around and look to the people at your firm. Not what they can do for you, but what can you do for them? What can you do to lift them up, to elevate them, to pour into them, to put their interests first? I think the flip side of that, though, there is individual accountability and responsibility. If you're in a position, don't be afraid to go to, someone and ask, for help. I mentioned, I've had an incredible set of mentors over my career, but in a lot of cases, in fact, most cases, they weren't kind of looking for me. I literally had to go. And I have one mentor in particular who's in the business, named Jim Wise, who's the wisest person I think I've ever met. But I had to meet with him multiple times and convince him. I was I want you to mentor me. And the first couple of times, he's nope, I'm not going to do it. I literally had to wear him down. It's I was prospecting him. I need you, because when I found in my mentors, when I found something that was desirable, I wanted to be in their orbit, and I was going to do whatever I could to get in that orbit. And if that meant that I had to knock on their door and show up at their doorstep and beg them to mentor me. And I think that's probably a good lesson for people in general. If you're in a firm, find, to Leah's point, there are going to be people who are going to limit you and hold you back. You should minimize your you got to interact with them, but minimize, what you do there. But I think find the people who exhibit the traits, the qualities, the things that you desire and want to learn from. And don't be afraid to raise your hand and go to them and say, will you help me? That's one of the things that honors someone. When you ask for their help, that honors them. And most people who are successful, not all, but most, they want to help others. That's this business. Most people want to help. That's why they get involved. What are things that men can do to help pave the way for women, Leah? Because I do think there's an important responsibility. A lot of times it's not because of a lack of desire. It's just kind of a lack of awareness. People get so busy, their heads down, kind of doing the job, that they don't really see around them. What do you think some things that men can do to help lift up women and help them along, if you will?
I think by human nature, we are drawn to people who have similar interests as us, right? Mm-hmm. So when men want to talk about what happened over the weekend, which basketball teams won, and I'm not saying women don't watch basketball, I don't mean that, but there's some things that we just have a more natural sense about. I would joke about men's locker room talk. I have no idea what really goes on, but I'll tell you what happens in the men's locker room and what
it's pretty.
The chatter in the women's locker room could not be more different. I am 100% certain about that, right? And it's because we naturally talk about different things that we want to talk about. When my husband goes out with his friends, I say, "What's new with this person?" We didn't talk about their wife or their kids or what they're doing. Would you talk what? And that's all we want to talk about as women. So my point of saying this is that I think naturally men, especially in the workplace, tend to gravitate sometimes to other men unknowingly, not realizing that it can be excluding in that regard, because you just naturally want to talk to a guy about whatever you want to talk to. And the same goes for women. So what I would say to encourage men to help lift up women, the first step is just be okay with being uncomfortable, right? It might not be the easiest thing to talk to a female about something that isn't as common, where maybe they're really into cooking for instance, and I'm picking terrible stereotypes here, but just something that it might make you uncomfortable.
That, not me, Leah.
I know. As soon as I said it, I'm going, this is just going the wrong direction where I'm trying to go here. But being okay with being uncomfortable, right? Being willing to do something that is not as natural as talking to your male counterpart. talking to a woman about what's important to her and really listening. Today's conversation this morning, we have an all employee meeting, and there's so many things happening in my head right now that go back to this meeting. But one compliment that I paid to one of my male counterparts is that he, of all the men in our organization, actually listen versus just going through the motions, listening with intention, taking notes, following up, really hearing what that other person has to say, whether it's male or female. But I think particularly with the females, where that might not always be an easy conversation. It is something that takes a little bit of effort and time. And I think that that's something that I would encourage men to do is, what women in your office are you not talking to? Okay. Who have you not really had a conversation outside of something, what's the latest with this client, that kind of conversation? Take it to the next level. That alone, getting to know somebody and getting to know how, will be the first step in being able to try to help them. Because if you don't even know what they want, then that's step number one. And I think a lot of us miss that mark just in general about figuring out how to get beyond just that superficial conversation, that surface level.
And make it less transactional is what I hear you saying in some ways.
Yes, in every
Make
way.
it relational,
Yes.
not just kind of transactional, like, hey, what's going on with client so-and-so?
Yep.
I think just from a leadership perspective, if you're a man or you're a woman that is listening to this, and we had a kind of a unique thing we did at Greenspring about kind of creating a culture of like recognition and appreciation. But one of the things that I used to do, and maybe people will find this helpful or not, is I had a little what I called praise journal. And so what I used to do is when I would see people do certain things, I would write it down because I didn't want to forget, right? So often we feel unseen, we feel unheard. And in a lot of cases, maybe we see somebody do something that's praiseworthy, but in the moment, I got to get to this meeting, and then you forget about it. So, this little praise journal, what that forced me to do was like in the moment, write down kind of what I saw, so that I could kind of bring that back up. People desire praise. You need truthy and gracie, right? You need to be truthful with people. But you need to have some grace and praise with them as well. So that was one thing I always found that was helpful, because I didn't forget. It's kind of like clients, right? Why should we remind clients of what we've done for them over the past year? I used to do that annually. It's kind of like, hey, here's all the things we accomplished together over the past year. Partly because I wanted to remind them, because I knew they probably forgot the good thing that I did for them, when it was January, the thing I did for them in April that, I would have hoped they would have remembered, but they probably didn't. So it was a nice little way for me to nudge and remind them. But I think you should do that with your people as well. Don't forget, reinforce the good things that you see in them and figure out a mechanism to do that.
Friday is National Employee Appreciation Day, if you did not know. And as part of our meeting
right now, so I did not know that. I probably should have.
And I'm always a sucker for any sort of celebration. But this morning, what we normally have a question of the week, and everyone has to answer this question of the week, and it's kind of get to know each other at another level type of thing, team bonding. But today, I gave everybody a pass on the question of the week, because I think some people totally hate it. But what I did instead was today, I had to go, again, as somebody who supervises everyone, I had to give a compliment, and I really picked a single word to describe each individual, and I could never reuse the word. And personally, I loved it. I have no idea what other people thought, but I think it went over pretty well, right? Like you said, showing appreciation. And I will tell you, Josh, selfishly, I am an Enneagram 3 who cannot hear enough good things about myself. Like I live off of this. I am a words of praise, love language person, whatever that's called. But for the first time today, I gave all the words of praise and got nothing back. That was the whole point of the exercise. And I was okay with it. Yeah. For the first time, I actually felt like a leader, or someone who didn't need that affirmation, that I could simply pass it on. And that was actually a huge revelation for me. And the amount of my cup was overflowing without needing any of that. Yeah. Oh my gosh, it pays dividends, is my point of reiterating what you just said.
Yeah, so I'm a the 5 love languages. I'm a words of encouragement, right? That's what it is. And I'm actually an Enneagram 3 with a 2 wings. So like, I'm the same, like I know where you're coming from. There's some really good things about being an Enneagram 3. There's some not so good things with that as well. What are some of the like resources or organizations within the industry for women, and trying to elevate and help women get more of a voice at the, within the industry?
So 2 organizations that I'm involved with. The first is the Women in Retirement Conference. It's something that I attended first time back in 2019, kicking and screaming, why do I want to go to a conference with all women? This sounds like a terrible idea. And here I am now co-chairing the event for 2023. So I obviously came back and was totally wrong. There is nothing better than being in a room with your peers and being able to not talk about industry for 3 days. It is so much more about working on yourself. It is one of the most selfish times I think all of us in the room take, and it is so fulfilling. And I think that room is a good place that if you're going in with any sort of fears, any sort of chips on your shoulders, that conference will change you. It is one of those things where you're surrounded by women who truly want to help women, people of all different levels of experience, and it is such a great immersion where people are actually open and honest. And if you're not, someone will sit you down and get to the heart of who you are. And I love that about this conference. The other organization that I'm a part of is WIPN. So we inspire, promote, network, and it's all of those things. It is very inspiring and promoting and networking, and very intentionally about how to have that conversation about getting to the next level of promotion that you want, how to ask specifically for a raise, how to dive into a conversation more intentionally. Very strong skill developments as a part of that organization as well. So, and I'm sure there are others that I'm not involved with, but those would be 2 that I know firsthand really are working to having conversations with women, and starting to chip away at some of those things we just didn't talk about before.
Yeah. I'm going to make sure to put those links to those in the show notes. Afterwards. And this is my challenge to listeners. If you are a man in leadership at your firm, or you are a partner, then what you should do is you should pay for some of the women in your firm to go to these conferences. That's going to send a powerful message to them that you're investing in them, in their career, and that you do want them to have success. So that's my challenge to listeners. Leah, this has been it's gone by fast. It's been an awesome conversation. What we didn't talk about was really much retirement related. I can just say that you are a rock star in the industry. I heard that on Retireaholics, and just the way you've gone about building the practice at Shepherd. You are a super talented advisor, but I got to tell you, this has been one of the most enjoyable episodes that I've done. This will be probably number 32 or 33, but I am just incredibly grateful that you were willing to be honest, not just about your successes, but about lessons learned and failures. And I think listeners will get a lot out of this. And I just think you're great for this industry. I think you're great for your firm. And I'm grateful that you talk about this today, because I think it's a story that needs to be heard. I think it's something that gives others permission to talk about. And maybe if, as a takeaway from this episode, we get the conversation going, maybe that's going to be really helpful within the industry. So I appreciate you hopping on today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for sharing my story and my voice. And it's just been so great to get to know you better, Josh, as well. I love the dialogue. I don't think I even realized how much sometimes you're so busy doing what we're doing
Yeah.
that you forget that how much you enjoy what you do. And so getting to talk about that for an hour has been a real treat. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Have an awesome day. And thanks again for being a guest. You were a rock star.
Thanks, Josh.